Good morning, ladies and joims. I'm drinking out of my musical coffee mug. Really bad coffee. I'm sorry, but I grew up on instant. Yes, that's a semiotic indicator of my working class status. The thing is, we did everything to doctor instant so that it tasted okay. Like, for instance, you heat milk in a saucepan with the instant, so it'd be all milk, like cafe con leche, with some brown sugar. It's not bad. I'm not a big fan of dark roast. I mean, Starbucks to me always tastes burnt. Gotta be honest. But that's not the purpose of this morning post. This one is the book of Job. One of my favorite books. Because it's the first, probably in literature, to ask, why do good men suffer and the wicked don't? Why is it so arbitrary? And we're still trying to pretend that if somebody suffers, there's a reason. Nowadays it's called lack of self-esteem, they're dysfunctional. We can't accept the idea that suffering is arbitrary. Because to accept that idea is to pull out the rug behind all incentives to virtue, supposedly. Except for the existentialist one, which is you are responsible for your own decisions, and what you do, whether it leads to good or evil, is what you do. It's your sense of virtue. There is no good or evil. There are just decisions, good and bad. I don't know if I buy into that, but Job. Now the truth is, in Job, God never answers the question of Job's suffering. Why? Never. All right? He rebukes the comforters of Job who are telling Job, well, you must have done something wrong. God wouldn't hammer somebody this bad if they were good. He completely rebukes them, upbraids them for speaking in ignorance. Right? But what does he answer Job with? Since he never answers the question of why a good man might be caused to suffer. Of course, in the Bible, Satan the accuser comes before the throne of God. Now, Satan the accuser, you might see him in terms of being an extreme version of the comforters of Job. Satan in the Old Testament is not this evil creature with the horns of Pan going around making people do sins. What Satan is the observer. He's the prosecutor before the throne of God. And he presents his case against man at all times, against their evil, against their lack of virtue. Satan is the ultimate pietist, the one whose virtue is all based on his own self-righteousness. And he comes before the throne of God, and God says to him, hey, where have you been? And he says, I've been wandering the earth. And God says, have you seen my servant Job? Because Job is something special. Job's ultra-virtuous. He prays at all the right times. He does all this out of gladness, out of love of God, not out of pietism. You don't get a sense in the beginning of Job that Job is a goody two-shoes, a prude, priggish in any way. Job is truly a virtuous man, a man filled with the love of God. And God brags about it. And Satan says, well, I don't know. Sure, he's a nice guy. You're giving him everything. You're giving him a Ferrari. You gave him a great-looking wife. You gave him a beautiful house. Whatever. If you took all those things away, if you took everything away from him, he'd curse you and die. He'd curse you. And God takes the bet. God says, okay, I give you power to take everything away from Job. Everything except his life. And everything is taken away from him. There's those annoying servants that come and said, I have only come to tell you. Very interesting, because the messenger is the messenger of death, of destruction, of loss. And this messenger, this one that survives the massacre, comes to tell Job all his children have been killed. Then he loses all his wealth. He loses his health. He's tormented day and night. He's always tired, but he can never sleep. And Job is in the pit. And along come the comforters of Job, just like the self-help books. Tell him, Job, it's all your fault. Stop bitching and moaning. Stop complaining. Stop vetching. Go and repent. You've done some great sin. And Job stubbornly clings to his own righteousness because he's not a dishonest man. He hasn't done anything. And that starts the whole question of why a good man might suffer wrongly. And this question is never answered in the book, except in a way that I don't think preachers bring up, and we should think about it. Because the Christian church certainly doesn't want to think it has any ties to mojo. Mojo, in a sense, is the energy of God's creative power. All right? It's the accessing in a human construct of divine grace. All right? And the answer God gives Job is much greater than any verbal construct. It's not a why or wherefore, well, I did it for this reason, I did it for that reason. The answer is his own power. After the youngest speaks out of turn, so to speak, he lets the eldest speak, but then he speaks and he's not even supposed to, which is typical of the Bible. Because God does not allow himself to be subject to priority. Jacob is the second born, clutching the heel of his brother Esau, and he's the one that receives the birthright. So this young man speaks, and most of his speech is just like the others. Oh, Job, repent, blah, blah, blah. How dare you complain? And then he starts speaking of the majesty of God. And that's when God interrupts this kid. Kind of slaps him upside the head, and God himself, in the form of the maelstrom, comes. And he speaks to Job. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? When the stars sang for joy in the sky? Can you catch Leviathan by the hook? Can you set the morning sun? On and on and on. This hymn of his own majesty. And at the end of this, Job says, I'm so sorry. I repent. Although he has done nothing wrong, except for one thing. And it's not even a wrong. Job is so immersed in his own life, his misery, that he cannot access his connection to that which is beyond misery, beyond failure and success, beyond all the categories, the majesty of creation, the majesty of that awe-inspiring power of the surroundings of his world. Because sorrow makes us so self-absorbed. We have no choice. To be drowned in loss is to lose sight of anything. The birds, the trees, the mountains, everything that outlives us, that outlasts us, that sings the majesty of creation. And before God gives back, because that seems to be a coda, in the very end of Job, Job gets back everything he lost tenfold. Of course we know you can't get back children that died. You cannot, they cannot be replaced. All right, not psychologically, not in any other way. And once you've had that kind of trauma, that cannot be replaced. But I venture that the true wager of Job is this, that you can lose nothing on this earth because none of these things are real or permanent. You can lose nothing on this earth except for your connection to that grandeur, to majesty, to the glory that deserves to be obeyed, to the waves of the sea. And this is the underpinning of poets. All right? This idea that everything can be taken from you except the power of creation. That all the other stuff is arbitrary. The devil, for all he does to accuse, Job does not curse God. He vetches mightily. At one point he says, can't you leave me alone long enough to swallow my own spit? Curse the womb that bore me. Job curses everything but God, because the only thing he's lost is his sense of God. And when God comes and speaks to him directly, at such a moment, Job is at the ground zero of his being. And only the direct voice of God, through the maelstrom, through the storm, through the majesty of nature, can pick him up from his despair. That is the only answer. Who knows why good people suffer? Right? The only answer to that is majesty. That we are not just in our lives where the conditions are good or bad, favorable or unfavorable. We are in a universe of great awe. And the thing to do, I've worked with children who have had catastrophic loss. Father that abandoned them, mothers that died. And to work with such kids, I've always found it effective if I can get them reconnected to something that cannot be taken away from them, or has temporarily been taken away from them but can be reaccessed, which is the sense of majesty. The sense that they're part of a great venture, that they are not meaningless, that all the bad things that happen to them cannot avail against this grandeur. If you can find that in poetry, that's great. If you can find that by walking in nature, great. But I found that this is the only thing that often drags these kids up from the despair, because they always blame themselves. They can't help it. I must have been a bad person. That's why my dad left. I must have been horrible. That's why my mother died. Right? They are their own accusing comforters. And the world does not help with all this self-esteem talk. All right? There is no barrier between the self and the created world, except for the artificial barrier of our conditional realities. And this is what needs to be removed, so that into these kids again can come a sense of their own participation in this sense of awe. It would be stupid to answer that question intellectually. It can only be answered experientially. Why do people suffer? The answer to that is the wordless waves of the sea, the continuation of the mountains, the rivers, the cities, the sounds. The answer is that there is something that surpasses failure and success. We need to get out of that binary, or we cannot find the spirit. And in poetry too, we need to get out of the binary of failure and success. This is why I take exception to much of the workshop construct, because what it does is it promotes this kind of killing competence. These poems that are well made, but they don't access that majesty. They're not going for broke. They're not reaching the ground zero of despair, nor are they rising to that level of transcendence beyond a facility for words. And so I'd like to really delve into the book of Job one time, but for now I think that's it. I've talked enough. The answer to suffering is majesty. There is no other answer. There's no reason for it. It comes to those who are really good people and have done nothing to deserve their sorrow. It comes sometimes to the bastards, and sometimes it doesn't. They get off scot-free. Yes, it's unfair, because it's not subject to the laws of fairness or unfairness. And its only remedy is the stars that sing for joy in the sky, the tree in front of you. Witness. Witness is its only remedy. Job is happy before God gives him back one thing. Before he returns one thing that he has lost, he is happy. The moment he has the direct experience, not concept, not some construct of philosophical readjustment of the brain patterns, but a direct experience of the majesty of creation. At that moment, he has everything back, even though nothing has returned to him yet.